Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with tests, school, and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is mental math and automaticity. But first, let's meet our special guest, Mike McGibbon.
Mike McGibbon started tutoring at Kaplan while he was a student at UC Berkeley. After graduating in 2002, he moved to New York City to study music and played the trumpet professionally. During this time, Mike also worked for several New York City tutoring agencies and eventually transitioned to a full-time tutoring career. He now runs his own solo tutoring practice, focusing on the ACT, SAT, and IC. He is the CEO and co-founder of Math Chops and Grammar Chops, an adaptive math and grammar practice tool. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mike, it's great to have you, especially because it's shocking that we haven't had you back on the show for a while. You have been with us covering lots of topics over the years. Episode 165, we discussed differences between SAT and ACT math. In episode 372, we spoke about making learning science work for you. Episode 332, we discussed Math Chops, which we all love. Episode 480, how standardization can benefit education. And in episode 532, to discuss all about digital SAT math. It's no surprise that today's conversation will center around math and cognitive science. But before we get into that, we'd love to hear what you've been up to. What is new in your world, Mike?
Well, let's see. A lot of the fall was taken up releasing Grammar Chops, which was super fun because I got to work with someone else writing the questions for a change, Dave Lynch, who did an amazing job. And then just recently we released Mental Math Master on Math Chops, which is a way for students to master their times table through 12 times 12, including division and remainders, and then also kind of arithmetic, all arithmetic, addition and subtraction, like, 52 minus 38, things like that.
That's awesome.
Mental Math Master. Now, isn't the idea of mental math ridiculous in an age where everyone is carrying calculators?
You should only learn mental math if you want to be faster, more accurate, get higher scores on tests, get better grades, and just feel better about yourself as a math person. But otherwise,
only
only
you should only learn mental math. You want to be successful in life, have a high self-esteem. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I really do think it's incredibly important. And, a lot of times kids will say, well, when am I ever going to use logarithms, or when am I going to use, trig identities? And, sometimes we do have to scramble to come up with an answer for that particular student. But if they ask me about mental math, I can say with 100% confidence that it will help them in life, no matter what they end up doing.
Well, I just think it's so important that you have a sense of numbers, right? I mean, we all know, and just in a practical sense in the real world, if you're overcharged or, it's amazing to me now watching students who really cannot or have not mastered mental math or no number sense, if you will. I think about that in the real world. You are more of a target because you would have no idea if the numbers jibe or not. And we see that a lot, right, in tutoring sessions where you're like, whoa, that's way off. But they have no sense that their answer is completely off.
Your point about number sense is really good because, it's like the difference between a third and a half. There are people who think that a third is larger than a half, just because they just have no sense of or that. People are always trying to explain the difference between a million and a billion.
Yeah.
Because people even if you have a strong sense of numbers, it's hard to get your head around that magnitude. But just the fact that people don't understand numbers comparatively or absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side, when you do understand it, it makes you very powerful because you are free to focus on higher level skills. And, so when you can make that mental math automatic, you don't have to think anymore about, 6 times 7 or the fact that, when you see 8 and 40, maybe we're going to be multiplying times 5 here somewhere else in the problem. You've already noticed that relationship without trying, and all that other mental bandwidth is free to focus on higher level problems. So especially on standardized tests, it's something maybe we take for granted because, we just had this mental math down for a long time. But, to flip it on its head, if you imagine if you were an evil wizard who wanted everyone to get terrible math scores, and you could only take away one skill, mental math would be an incredible one to take away because they would be slow, they'd make more mistakes, they would doubt every move they make, and they would not have any bandwidth to think about higher level problems because they'd be so stuck, just trying to get these calculations right. So it really is a pernicious problem if you have it.
If it's so bad, then why did schools stop requiring students to learn their multiplication tables?
That's a great question. That sounds like another topic for tests and the rest.
Well,
I don't
I
know.
will say it
Is there a
feels like
Someone on here.
conspiracy here? Is the evil wizard at work?
no, but I think it's weird. It almost feels like sometimes for me like a conspiracy against memorization, right? Like to not learn to memorize anything.
There was totally a pushback against memorization, right? And this hit reading and math because people were like, what do you need to memorize facts for if you
Yeah.
have a pocket computer? And right. And so we saw on the reading side now, the reading wars are cycling back to background knowledge. And I
Hmm.
think that that's kind of the same thing you're sharing here, Mike, is that math depends on background knowledge. And if you can't even recognize the relationships between factors and multiples right in front of you,
Hmm.
it's harder to build up more information about what you're looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. Like if you take an ACT math section and you just sort of scan it casually and you think, okay, imagine that something like 4 times 8 would give me pause, or 21 minus 17. I'd be a little nervous. I'd want to put that into calculator. Okay, so that's your state of mind. And you're looking at a triangle problem where you have two of the angles, but you need to find the third one, and they add up to 180. Well, that's going to cost you. You're going to have to use a calculator to make sure that that's correct. Or suppose there's, the typical proportion problem where there's a tree and its shadow, and then there's a building and its shadow, and you have to see the relationships with those numbers. Well, you're not confident that 8 times 9 is 72. So when you see the 8 and the 72 in that question, 9 doesn't automatically occur to you. So you
Mhm.
might not be able to solve that. Or let's say you're factoring a quadratic and it's x squared plus 15x plus 56. And the only way to factor it is to know that there are two numbers that add to 15 and multiply to 56. But again, if that's not already automatic, then it's going to be really hard for you to solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I find the same with perfect squares. I mean, because perfect squares are just part of the multiplication table, but they are prominent. And on test problems, at least,
Yep.
when you see a perfect square in a problem, very often there's an opportunity. Students
Right.
that recognize, hey, that's a perfect square, 121, that's 11 squared, they're one step closer to the solution without having to figure out the significance of the number. Whereas other people, if it doesn't mean a thing to them, they're like, 121 is like any other number.
Yep.
They are falling behind. They just don't see the path.
Right. The recognition is key, I think, because I teach that a lot. When you recognize something about a number, right, that
Yep.
often unlocks the pathway to the solution. But if you don't see those numbers a certain way, then yeah, then you're like lost.
Well, and I hope it doesn't sound too much like we're saying, well, there are people who have mental math and there are people who don't. And if you don't, then life's going to be terrible because you can learn mental math. I am very confident that everybody can learn it. And a lot of times, if you're working with a younger student and they say, oh, I don't have my times table down, I don't know the numbers. When you actually go through it, say like, well, do you know 3 times 4? Oh, sure, that's 12. Well, how about 10 times 7? Well, that's 70. What
Yeah.
about 6 times 11? It's 66. Well, you narrow it down. It's like they don't know the sixes, the sevens, the eights, and maybe the 12s. Most of
Nobody
the
likes
time,
the eight. Nobody likes
nobody likes the eight. But if you actually go through it, there might be 10 things that they don't know. So if they commit to learning it and then they throw the crutches to the side and just don't use the calculator for a period of time, they'll get much better at it. So anyway, that's all to say. I don't want people to feel like we're just criticizing you if you don't know mental math. It's something that is really going to benefit you if you put the time in.
Right. But the goal when it comes to basic multiplication and processes like that is automaticity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we say automaticity, it's a charged word that the three of us, discuss a lot together. What does it mean and why is it so important?
Automaticity just refers to the quality of being able to do things automatically, effortlessly, without thought. So in regular life, you experience it all the time. So right now, as we're talking, I'm not trying to figure out the definitions of any of the words that you're saying. If I take a drink of water, I'm not worried about like how my arm's going to move towards my face so that I can drink the water. These things are all automatic. And it relates back to a conversation we had on the Learning Science podcast a while ago.
Mhm.
There's the theory of working memory that says that your mind can really only focus on so many objects at a time. They sometimes refer to them as chunks.
Mhm.
So you can have really rich, flexible, complex chunks. Like, for example, your knowledge of your hometown and how to get around it. You know it so well that you can be driving a car, which you also know how to do really well, and navigating the streets of your city and talking to me about something, because the driving and the talking and the knowledge of the hometown are all automatic. And you see this in a lot of, well, actually, anybody who's highly skilled at anything has made many things automatic. Like if you give a lawyer a contract, they will scan just pages and pages of things that make no sense to me at all, and then seize on one phrase and say, that one bothers me. You can't have that in the contract,
Right.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned driving a car because I still remember learning to drive and how frustrating and scary it was because I lacked automaticity, right? Like, and for
Mm.
me, that's a very like visceral feeling of understanding automaticity is that feeling of not being able to drive and figuring out how you're going to do all these things at one time. And like our students, we know that when you're taking tests, there are a bunch of things you're going to have to do at one time, most especially if you're working on a harder math question. So
Yes.
developing that automaticity is what is sort of the pathway to being able to work on more complex problems for sure. So I'm wondering, what are some examples maybe of higher level problem types that would depend on possessing these automatic math skills?
So we mentioned, or I was talking about factoring quadratics. That's a good one. Logarithms are one where you have to recognize perfect squares or cubes. And there are a lot of questions where they're combining lots of skills and they would take it for granted. Like, for example, if you're talking about the sides of a rectangle and this one goes up 20% and that one goes up 40%, and what's going to happen to the area. Not only do you need to know how to calculate the area and calculate percents, but all of that depends upon your mental math skills. So
Mhm.
it's really just the basis of a lot of other problem types, just in the same way that your vocabulary is the basis for speaking with anybody.
Yeah, I think that there's even like you have the mechanical aspects of the problem solving,
Mhm.
which you can make automatic by mastering operations, by having worked with formulas so often that they come to mind. You don't have to ask yourself, is it 2 pi r or pi r squared or 2 pi
Mhm.
r squared? Like you're not fumbling for the right. But there's also, I think, that through experience, through the processes that you can generate automaticity, you can automate your heuristics, your problem solving skills. Like you can break down different problems and very quickly analyze them and recognize prior patterns. You can unpack your toolkit
Mhm.
of different alternate problem solving strategies and just work that much faster. I think that we all encounter students that struggle because we're talking fundamentally about test prep. This applies everywhere, but I think
Yeah.
test prep is a great example of how the clock is ticking, the problems are meant to be challenging. Student test takers aren't all expected to finish in the allotted time.
Hmm.
And we work with students and they're like, I have no idea how I would ever read this passage in this amount of time or answer all of these questions
Mhm.
this much time. This is especially prominent in the digital SAT now. But automaticity helps you make up the time by making automatic a lot of the aspects through practice and experience and coaching that slow you down. You can gain accuracy and also gain time.
Well, I want to also mention, I think what's interesting too about, if you think about multiple choice tests, is how the test writers, when they construct, if it's multiple choice, the answer choices, right? They can even predict what some of the errors students will make will be. And so if your mental math skills aren't good, right, to kind of suss out like the incorrect answers, you fall into the trap of saying, well, and I find this with students kind of like, especially when, let's say, just below average scores with math, they think, oh, I did really well in that test because I got an answer every time, right? Just because you get an answer and it matches doesn't mean it's right. And so this kind of speaks to, I think, the fact that even with multiple choice, they anticipate the kinds of mental math or math errors you'll make, and then you won't even know you've sort of been sucker punched. Or combine that with being on the SAT, a grid-in question where it's like, oh, you make a mistake and there's no way of catching it because there's nothing to compare your answer against.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that when your mental math is not strong, it introduces doubt into almost every move you make. And doubt is incredibly dangerous on a standardized test, not just in math, in reading and all the sections. Because if you think about it, what really causes time pressure to affect you on a test? I mean, if you give me a quantum mechanics test, I'm not getting a low score because of the time pressure. I'm getting a low score because I don't know quantum mechanics. I'm just going to get a 0, right? So, I mean, if you know something, you'll execute it quickly and confidently and pick the right answer. And the multiple choice doesn't matter because you already knew that, 20% of 50 was 10 and 10 happened to be B. So you picked B. You're not looking at the other answer choices almost don't even matter. Whereas if you're not sure and then you're parsing the answer choices, then you're going back and reading the question again and then doubting it. Oh, let me put that in the calculator one more time. That's where you run out of time and you don't have the bandwidth to think about some of these higher level elements of the problem that might be there.
Well, I would argue if you are aware of your own automaticity, it gives you more confidence. So, for example, I say to students sometimes, if I solve a problem myself and I look down and my answer isn't there, I go up. I know what I need to check. Maybe I didn't write it out. Maybe I punched in my calculator wrong. Maybe I need to recheck my calculation. I don't go into a tailspin of like, oh my God, I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. The doubt is not a barrier to then making sure I get the right answer. But that doubt, I think when you lack the confidence in your automaticity, that becomes problematic because you're second guessing and you're right. Then you shut down. You either guess too quickly, right? Or you don't even try at all. And so those become problems for, getting, they become confidence problems when you don't have the automaticity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing, we've been talking a lot about test performance, but when you lack automaticity, it also affects your ability to learn new concepts. Because, if you, let's say I'm trying to teach a student about systems of equations, and I'm showing them the substitution method where you're going to have to distribute constants across a parentheses, which involves multiplication and later add addition when you combine like terms. Or maybe the elimination method where you add one or subtract one equation to the other, and that's arithmetic. So if part of their mental bandwidth is just focused on, oh, what is 17 minus 13? Or, what is, 7 times 6? They're not going to be able to absorb what I'm saying, and they're not going to be able to think about it for themselves, more importantly. And so then what they end up doing is kind of just duct taping things together. You just sort of memorize processes. And down the road, I wrote something on Substack about math debt, and this is sort of a form of debt. You're kind of using a shortcut instead of really knowing the concept, and it'll get you through in the moment, just like maybe a loan that you took, a 30% interest rate or something. But when you keep on having to pay off that interest rate and it's compounding, you get to a point where it's all just duct tape. You don't understand anything, and it all started with the mental math.
Yeah, again, this ties really closely to what we understand now about reading. How without background knowledge, you're lost, you're projecting ideas on, right? And I think what you spoke about with math problems, students are looking for processes. They're looking for algorithms. They want you to tell them when you see this, do that. And that's not how the world works. Like you can have a bunch of algorithms. You can say, when I see this, this is a possible step, but you have to understand why and when to apply it. Elaborate a bit more on the concept of math debt, please.
Well, I think it's just the idea that if you fully own something, then you're free to spend all of your resources, in this case, your attention, on acquiring a new concept. So, for example, maybe a good example would be exponential growth. So let's say that you're really comfortable with multiplication, but you've never heard of exponential growth. You've actually never heard of exponents. And I say, okay, well, imagine you have $100 and you double it every year for 10 years. So that would be like 100 times 2 times 2 times 2, and so on. And I said, there's actually this cool thing where instead of me writing out 10 2s, what I can do is just put 2 to the 10th power. I can write this little 10 above the 2. And if you really understood mental math very well, you'd be thrilled that someone had invented this notation. This is great. Now I don't have to write out all those 2s. This makes total sense. And the concept of exponential growth would fall right into place because you're completely free to just think about that concept and wow, that's cool. That must really just explode. Like, what would that number be? 2 to the 10th, and you tell them it's 1,024, wow. Okay. Whereas if you're just like struggling to do that multiplication and you've already decided that you suck at math and it's not going to go well, then this is just another thing for you to memorize. And so you're accumulating even more debt. Now you're kind of just memorizing some process, and you have to memorize a process for every single variation that comes up because you don't really understand it. Similar to if you didn't really have a mental model of your hometown and you just had to memorize, okay, I turn right and then I turn left and then it's just too much. Eventually you're going to run out and basically go bankrupt, just like in the real world, because all of your resources, all of your attention are being spent on these inefficient processes instead of acquiring more powerful understanding.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think the picture we're painting is one in which learners, students, should definitely be working on their mental math skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a case for people who are already adults to care about this? And if you just never got around to memorizing the times table, is it too late? Does it matter?
I don't think it's too late, and I think it does matter. First of all, a lot of people have jobs that do involve some basic math. Whether you're, a cashier or, if there are any numbers or money involved in your job, then it would be good for you to have some sense for the numbers. But also just if you think about your personal budget, and having a sense of how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, being able to quickly do calculations while you're driving or while you're walking around. And oh, geez, we went out to a restaurant a few times this month. Maybe we shouldn't do that again until next month. Or certainly with retirement, there are all kinds of very useful heuristics that are much easier with mental math. So, for example, there's the idea, I always forget if it's the rule of 70 or the rule of 72, but it's the idea that if you divide, let's go with 70 for now, by an interest rate, that tells you how long it's going to take your money to double. So like if you were earning 7% on your money, then it would take 10 years for that to double. And that can be kind of useful if you have some kind of target in mind for retirement, like, well, what do I have in the bank? How long would it take to double? So I do think it helps quite a bit just in daily finance and long-term finance, and then just in the jobs you're doing, or if you play fantasy football, could help you.
I'm in trouble then, Mike.
Mike is just gloating because he did really well this year.
Could have done bad.
Yeah. But you know what? That might be enough of an incentive for people to. Mm-hmm. I think that more and more in a world where statistics are thrown at us and big numbers are bandied about, failure to understand those numbers mm-hmm. becomes a matter of life and death. And really like your entire world is based on your understanding of what is happening around you. And that's very often depicted quantitatively. You can't just hand wave and say, well, I'm not good with numbers.
Yeah. Well, even sometimes, if you have a kid and you go to the pediatrician and they give you some medicine and you are the primary caregiver at home, so you have to give them the right dose of medicine. And sometimes you do have to do basic math, in terms of, how many milliliters of this to give or something like that. But again, everybody deals with money, and I think money is pretty important for everyone. And if you don't understand how to manipulate those numbers, you're certainly vulnerable to making a mistake or getting taken advantage of.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Mike, we could, as ever, talk with you all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can email me at mike@mathchops.com.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.